One of my favourite storylines from Batman the Animated Series is the tragedy of Clayface. A disfigured actor, motivated by vanity, Matt Hagen went down a dark path to restore his beauty, but it ultimately robbed him of his humanity. Obviously, shape-shifting mudmen don't exist in real life, so it's a testament to the writing and direction of this series that his struggles felt so real and genuinely spoke to people. When the first press release for the new Batman cartoon, Batman Caped Crusader, was published, I was delighted to see that one of the first villains to be unveiled was Clayface. However, I felt a slight sense of trepidation. How could they possibly top the tragedy of Matt Hagen and the superlative performance of Ron Perlman? Surely, any subsequent Clayface would be living in his mighty shadow. And it turns out that the Caped Crusader creative team aren't trying to compete with what came before. Sure, they take a few elements from that classic show, but pursue the ideas down an entirely separate path, and it works really well. First things first, this Clayface, actor Basil Karlo, is ripped straight from the comic books of the 1940s. The original comic book Clayface first appeared in Detective Comics 40 in 1940. Karlo wore a grisly clay mask and went around stabbing his co-workers for the crime of remaking one of his films without him. I've already talked about the origins of the comic book Clayfaces. Yes, there were several of them, and elements of each of them fed into BTAS's Clayface, in the very first video essay I ever did about 2 years ago, so go check that out if you'd like to hear more about this topic. After this video, of course. But Caped Crusader's Clayface isn't a straight adaptation of the original. No, they take the basic idea, a disgruntled movie star that murders his colleagues out of a misplaced sense of betrayal, while incorporating elements from the Batman the Animated Series Clayface, but viewed from a different angle. Basil Karlo hates the way he looks, and is willing to do anything to be able to change his face. All he wants to do is be a leading man, someone admired and adored, but instead, he's always cast as the villain of the film. Out of desperation, he finances work on a serum that would allow him to sculpt his own face to look like anyone he wants. And the serum works perfectly. Before the show came out, I was under the impression that this serum would fail and disfigure Karlo, which would lead to his murderous campaign of revenge. Leaked character designs showing Clayface's hideous face supported my assumption. Or so I thought. But Karlo's dream came true. He could sculpt his face however he saw fit. But when he obtains his ideal face, things don't go according to plan. He thinks that once he's handsome, he'll be cast as a leading man instead of a heavy, and that his co-star Yvonne Francis will fall madly in love with him. But that's not true. Yvonne rejects his advances, and this revelation that the problem wasn't his face, it was just an excuse, causes his mind to break, as symbolised by his face losing its consistency, and his pleasant facade melts away and is replaced with an enraged expression. This scene is a delightful callback to the third Clayface, whose own face dribbled away while on a date with a nameless beautiful woman, although Karlo doesn't have the flesh-melting powers of the third Clayface. This scene makes it clear that Karlo isn't some tragic figure. He's arrogant and won't take no for an answer. In a departure from the BTAS version of Clayface, who famously had the Renew You formula forced down his throat, Karlo willingly subjects himself to the formula, and, as part of his scheme, forces it on its creator Jack Ellman before using his corpse as a decoy to make it seem like Basil Karlo has been murdered. To me, that's the key distinction. Karlo is the abuser, not the abused. And the face he wears as Clayface is a fabrication and a deliberate choice on his part. That's not what he really looks like. Frankly, I don't think he looks like anything anymore. It's a face that he chooses to wear when playing the part of a killer. It's a symbolic mask that represents his ugly desires. And it was designed to frighten people. He covers the bottom half of his face with a red scarf, presumably so he can shock people with a dramatic reveal when he lowers it. That, and it makes him look like the Shadow. I have to assume that the formula that allowed him to shape his face also caused damage to his brain, which would explain his murderous mood swings. Although, actors being actors, he might just be temperamental. One of the things I really love about this episode is how Karlo uses his powers to mislead Renee Montoya, who is investigating Yvonne's disappearance. He presents himself as kindly Basil Karlo, and when Montoya sees through his demonstrable lies, he dumps a decoy corpse in his home to throw Montoya off his scent. This brings an end to Karlo's career. He couldn't easily explain how he was no longer deceased, but he doesn't care. It turns out his experience as Clayface has caused a revelation. He loves being a villain. While the serum didn't solve all of his problems, it made him realise his true nature, and that was better than any affections he might have earned with a handsome face. He just cannot resist playing with Montoya. He impersonates his co-star Daryl Manning, who he had brutally murdered and hidden beneath the soundstage in the studio a day earlier, and gives a gushing testimonial to the talent of Karlo. The finest actor of their generation. A privilege to work with. And so modest too. Montoya's interview with the film director Edmund Haynes, meanwhile, is less flattering, stating that the camera was unkind to Basil, and perhaps that's why Karlo decided that Haynes needed to die. The thing about Karlo is, okay, he's not traditionally handsome in the way that classic movie stars often were. But he's not hideous, he's not disfigured or deformed. His ugliness is on the inside, and maybe that's what the camera picks up. Karlo makes no effort to redirect Montoya. It's almost like he wants her to find out his scheme. When Haynes points the finger at Elman, Montoya heads to his last known address, where she finds Karlo disguised as him. After a brief scuffle, with a very cool reveal of how malleable Clayface's face is, as Montoya leaves a fist imprint in his jaw, Montoya finds herself tied up as an audience of one, as Karlo delivers a scene-chewing explanation of his entire scheme. Initially, he felt like he was enacting a revenge plot. The serum didn't solve all of his problems, he'd been conned. But he soon found he liked the power he had over people, being able to fool them, being able to pretend to be anyone. It was a gift, not a curse. And he liked how powerful he felt when he took a life. The episode's title, "And Be a Villain," is an overt nod to a line from Shakespeare's Hamlet, where Hamlet laments how two-faced King Claudius is, and how he can smile and be a villain. Clayface clearly thought of himself as being Hamlet, but in reality, he is the villain, committing murders and then feigning ignorance to Montoya before faking his own death to evade suspicion. He's not Hamlet, he's Claudius, and he loves telling anyone that'll listen to him about it. Although Yvonne is less enthused by his performance and her critique tips him over the edge. The Hamlet reference isn't the only Easter egg. I adored the nod to writer Greg Rucka's time on Detective Comics. Montoya's badge number is 742, and Greg Rucka became the lead writer of Detective Comics on issue 742. It was this run that Renee Montoya became a fully fleshed out character, along with several other members of the GCPD. Something I learned in the middle of writing this video is that Caped Crusader's Karlo was partially inspired by the sad life of classic Hollywood actor Laird Cregar. Cregar had a hulking physical form that often led to him being cast as the villain in his films, but Cregar was a man of exceptional talent and he wanted more out of his career. He had been labelled as the man of many faces in the press. Ding ding ding, where have we heard that before? This was meant as a compliment, but Cregar struggled with remarks like this, as well as comments about his physique. He once said, "No matter how nice people are to me, I'm still something of an oddity to them, and being an oddity isn't fun." Per Bruce Timm on a post on the anime superhero forums, Karlo's origin story does have faint echoes of Laird Cregar's relationship with Merle Oberon while they were filming The Lodger. Cregar became obsessed with losing weight after Oberon suggested that he could be a romantic leading man instead of always being typecast as villains. The stress that the crash dieting put on his body probably led to his tragic early death from a massive heart attack. He may have looked like an older, distinguished gentleman, but Cregar was only 30 years old when he died, with about half a dozen films under his belt. And that's not the only reference to classic movies in the episode, it's positively rammed full of them, so many I couldn't even identify them all. Case in point, Basil Karlo lives at Slade Terrace, and Slade was the name of the killer Cregar played in The Lodger. Thanks Bruce for sharing that one because it completely passed me by. However, I did notice that Edmund Haynes resembles Frankenstein director James Whale. The hapless actor Haynes loses his temper with looks like Lon Chaney's character from the lost silent film London After Midnight. The sword fight between Batman and Clayface looks like it was ripped straight out of a classic Errol Flynn film. Jack Elman is the spitting image of the designer of Universal's iconic Frankenstein's monster makeup, Jack Pierce. There are bound to be more I haven't picked up on, so share any you spot in the comments. And can I just say that I desperately want to see those old Basil Karlo movies. The Crimes of Dr. Z, Murders in the Wax Museum, and Return from the Grave. The former two films are clear reference to the 30s horror films Dr. X and Mystery of the Wax Museum. One criticism I've seen of this episode is that Batman is more of a secondary character. He spends most of his time shadowing Montoya's investigation, listening in via a bug he planted on her massively oversized coat while she was interrogating Bruce Wayne. However, I don't view this as an issue. Think of some of the best Batman the Animated Series episodes. Two-Face Part 1, Almost Got Him, Joker's Favour, and how little Batman was in those. Sometimes Batman is more effective when he's hiding in the background. That doesn't mean that Batman is passive, however. He saves Haynes from Clayface and has a thrilling sword fight, and later on he comes crashing through a skylight to save Montoya's life. One thing I found particularly noteworthy is that during his first confrontation with Clayface, we see signs of his compassion, he chooses to save a homeless man from being crushed by a ladder rather than catch Clayface. But that doesn't mean this Batman is soft. The Batman of Batman the Animated Series always tried to reason with his villains, especially Clayface. Caped Crusader's Batman, meanwhile, comes smashing through a skylight and immediately frees Montoya with no talking. Clayface tries to fight Batman off with an axe, to no avail, and Batman wails on him. I positively adored the shot of Clayface's mangled face after taking a few punches from Batman, but I wish they lingered on it just a little longer so that we could take it all in. Thankfully for Karlo, it shouldn't take a lot of effort to fix that squished up mass of muddy flesh. And Be a Villain is easily my favourite episode of the entire series. That's not to say that the subsequent episodes were bad, far from it, it's just that these 40s movie vibes clicked with me, and I adore the aesthetic of those old monster movies. In my review of the series, I said that it seemed to me like the creative team carefully looked at what worked in Batman the Animated Series and decided what to compete with, and what not to compete with. Clayface is an example of them not competing with BTAS's version of Clayface. He doesn't have a tragic backstory. There's no memorable Clayface theme that evokes alternating feelings of anger and sadness. No, instead Basil Karlo is a deluded man. One who thought he was on a righteous campaign of vengeance to get what he truly deserved, but quickly realised that he wasn't the hero in his own story. He presented himself as a kindly man, but the moment he was rejected by the object of his affections, he flipped. He could not handle disappointment or rejection. He is an unrepentant monster, and he couldn't be happier about it. Okay, that's it for this video essay. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, all the usual YouTube stuff. If you'd like to hear more about Batman Caped Crusader, why not check out our podcast Totally Schway Flip Side, where my wife and I have gone through all 10 episodes. This is a spoiler-filled conversation about each episode in sequential order, so only check this out if you've watched the show or if you have no intentions of ever watching it yourself. I offer channel memberships for $1.99 a month, which will grant you early access to my video essays, and some supplementary perks like custom emojis, priority responses to your comments, members-only videos, and community posts. And special thanks to my current channel members, who are all listed on the screen right now. Next time we're going to have a complete change of pace, going from a disturbing, obsessed murderer to a flighty kleptomaniac in the form of Selina Kyle, the Catwoman. Hope to see you then.